All right. So we are going to get going. Y'all, thank you so much for being here today. I'm happy to see everybody. Today we're going to go to a town called Massa Marittima, which is in the province of Siena. So we're in Tuscany in the province of Siena. We're going to visit the town called Massa Marittima. We're going to see a few works of art commissioned for the town, and then we're going to make a Tuscan summer recipe. Also on the map, you can see Poppiano, which is in the province of Florence. And that's on the map because that's where I live. And so I'm coming to you from here, which is the Castle of Poppiano, just to the southwest of Florence. I live right outside the castle walls down here. That's my house. So we're going to do two messages, and then we're going to get going with our program. So first of all, I just wanted to make an announcement that we have trips on the books for 2025, Tuscany in April, Sicily in May, and Puglia in September. So if y'all would like to travel next year, check out the information on the website there, elainetrigiani.com. And the Puglia trip is run together with Lorenzo, who most of y'all know. He's on the line with us tonight. He is manning the chat as well. So if y'all have any questions or anything, you can type them into the chat and Lorenzo will pass them along to me. So we're going to take questions during the cooking segment and then after that. Another quick message about olive oil. I think most of y'all know I have a small production of extra virgin olive oil, and we're going to use that later in the recipe that we're going to make today. If any of y'all would like to order some olive oil, I have a shipment going out on Monday, after which time there will be a shipping hiatus because Lorenzo and I are going to be in Puglia with the group. So we're starting our Puglia tour. But if you would like to order olive oil, there is a shipment going out on Monday. So today we're going to visit Massa Marittima. Again, we're going to go to the southern part of Tuscany, and Massa is on the western edge of the Colline Metallifere, or the Metalliferous Hills. You can see that it's very close to the Tyrrhenian Sea. It's also close to Elba. The mountains you see here are the island of Elba. The history of this area is linked to mining, metals like pyrite, copper, zinc, silver. There were prehistoric settlements here. During the Iron Age, the Etruscans were very active here. They were mining. They were making metal objects that were traded throughout the entire Mediterranean. And then right here on the hillside is the town of Massa Marittima. So the existence of the town, we think, dates to the 800s AD. That's the date of the oldest defensive structures. But most of the buildings that you see today date back to the golden age of Massa Marittima, which was during the 1200s and 1300s. So the medieval structures today house restaurants, cafes, small shops, residences, museums, civic buildings, everything. It's such a very kind of imposing medieval atmosphere, and it's just, everyday life is going on. Here's the Palazzo della Zecca. This was the mint. So Massa Marittima had the very impressive right to mint their own coins for a very brief period of time during the 1300s, from 1317 to 1335, when they came under the rule of Siena. They minted their own coins. So they were always allied with Siena, at least from the mid-1200s, if not before, and they had kind of a mutually beneficial relationship. Siena could offer protection to Massa Marittima, and Siena and the Sienese bankers really liked all those silver mines. So they had a reason for being in Massa. You're looking at a coin called the Grosso Massetano. It was worth 20 denarii. Pure solid silver struck with this conio. So here's more evidence of the link between Massa Marittima and Siena. Siena famously was founded, so they say, by the son of Remus, as in Romulus and Remus, who were raised by the she-wolf. They also founded Rome. So Siena latched onto that, and then all of its protectorates got some of the lupa sienese. So you see that as you're walking around town. And here you can see kind of lots of kind of lively atmosphere of the main piazza. This is just a random evening in the main piazza of town, and it's like a cliche, right? There's kids playing soccer, and people are out having a drink and having something to eat, all underneath the Romanesque church here, which is dedicated to San Cerbone. The diocese was actually founded on the coast but they were continually raided by pirates. So in the 11th century, they decided to just pick up and move everything to Massa Marittima. So they picked up and moved the seat of the bishop. They decided to build a cathedral, and they also moved the body of San Cerbone up to Massa. And that really sparked kind of the building boom here in Massa. You can see the church here. This is the facade of the church looking out this way. Here's the apse end of the church. Here you can see it again. And I'm showing you the overhead view because they have this great kind of trapezoidal piazza, all these little angular bits. And you can see how the town kind of built up around this kind of organically. And it really makes for a lot of drama. There's a very theatrical entrance into the piazza because you don't actually have a direct sight line to what you're coming up on. So you walk down these great little medieval streets and turn the corner, and here you are in this amazing piazza with this spectacular example of Romanesque architecture, which is also spectacularly sited on this raised pedestal, this platform. It really dominates the piazza like a Roman temple way up on one of those tall stylobates. And we're sort of thinking this must have been built on top of a Roman temple. And I haven't been able to find any evidence of that, although there are bits and pieces of Roman architectural detail that are reused in the church. I'll show you some in a minute. So the church that we're looking at was begun in the 11th century. It was being used already by 1062, so something was built by then, enough to have mass in. The church was not finished, though, until about 1300. So if you look at the bottom register, this part of the church, you can see there's a blind arcade, and come up a step to the middle register, you can see all these stripes. These are hallmarks of the Romanesque style and really typical of Tuscan and particularly Pisan Romanesque architecture. So I'm going to show you the capitals that are right here, the capitals of these pilasters of the facade. You can see that they reused an ancient Roman Corinthian capital here, and then they sculpted these anthropomorphic capitals. The last two that you're looking at have little images of animals and men. So these are contemporary to the building of the church in the Romanesque period. So they started the church in the 10, we don't know, whatever. By 1062, there was something there, 11th century. And by about 1300, they were finishing up, and they brought in, to finish the church, Giovanni Pisano. So he's either brought in by Massa Marittima or he was sent by Siena. But the presence of Giovanni Pisano speaks to the importance of Massa in this period. Giovanni Pisano is a very large, big deal. He was the capamaestro, or the head of the construction site of the great cathedral in Siena, which you see on the right. He was capamaestro from 1287 to 1296, and his father was before him. These building programs took centuries, right? So you have sort of a series of architects in charge. So Giovanni was a sculptor and architect, as was his father, Nicola, and we've talked about both of them at length here in this series. And so if you're interested to review or go and look, we have our video archive online. So we talked about Giovanni Pisano in video 37, and then his father Nicola in 38. And really, their influence really changed the course of Western art history. Like I said, this Giovanni is a large, big deal. And here's what he did in Massa Marittima. He completed the apse end of the church and that third register that you can see. He erected those spires, which are actually quite similar to what you see in Siena. And he continued the stripes. And usually you see the black and white stripes or the green and white stripes. You think of Pisa or Vieto, Siena. Here he did it in pink. Just lovely pink and white stripes that really visually add lightness and height to this building. Absolutely gorgeous. And then as Giovanni does, he sculpted these herms that are supporting the weight of these columns in the middle spire. So they're here. And on the outside of the building are casts, because on the the originals have been moved to the great, cute little museum of Massa Marittima, which is full of great works of art. Here you can see the herms of Giovanni Pisano together with a wooden crucifix carved and painted by Giovanni, originally on the high altar of the church. So again, the fact that Giovanni Pisano is here is just a real sign of the importance of Massa Marittima during the medieval period. Let's go into the church. You have to walk up these steps. I mean, it is vertiginous. Walking down is worse. Like walking up is one thing. I have to have help going down. It makes my knees shake. It is literally so steep. There's got to be a reason for that. I haven't figured it out yet. But coming up to the door of the church, you can see that there's a series of reliefs over the door. These were done in the early 1200s. We do not have the name of the artist, but they tell the story of Saint Cherbone. So he was born in Africa in the year 575 AD. He was bishop of Populonia on the coast, much loved. He ended up having to escape persecution by the Longobards. This is, after the fall of the Roman Empire, when these Germanic tribes moved down. And so he moved to the island of Elba, where he lived as a hermit. He died on the island, but he really wanted to be buried in the cathedral where he had been bishop. So his followers, following his wishes, take his body back to the mainland. And that's what you can see in the little scene there on the left. And his followers in a boat. And here's the body of the saint right here. And they, of course, ran into trouble. They ran into rough seas. And the miracle here happens when these angels swoop down from the heavens and basically clear kind of a corridor of calm seas so that they can go from Elba to the mainland with the body of the saint so that he can be buried in the cathedral. And then, of course, he's moved to Massa. The next scene, you can see another miraculous event from the life of San Cherbone. He has been thrown to the bears by Totila, who is the king of the Ostrogoths, the guy who's sitting on the throne over there on the right. So Cherbone had been accused of harboring the enemy, and Totila threw him into a pen with bears, and the bears loved him. They were licking his feet and made friends. So Totila realized who he was dealing with and immediately set him free. Here are another two panels from the life of Cherbone. The geese represent this moment when he had been called to the Vatican for a convocation with the Pope, and he decided he wanted to bring the Pope a present. And so on his way down to Rome, he calls to him a flock of geese who obey him, accompany him to Rome, go into the Vatican, and present themselves as a present to the Pope. So whenever you see Cherbone, there's usually a flock of geese somewhere around there. And then the last scene you see here on the right, he was very well known for saying Mass at dawn. So Cherbone would say Mass at dawn, and choirs of angels would come out to sing the Gloria for him. So going into the church, we go under those reliefs. This is what the interior of the church looks like with these painted vaults and the high altar down there at the end. Looking back, here's the controfacciata, or the back of the facade, and there's a stained glass window contemporary to the building of the church, again with scenes of the life of Cherbone. So the church is a main nave with two side aisles, and if you go down the aisle on the left, towards the apsis to the left of the main altar, behind this nice sort of series of velvet robes, you can see what is left of an altarpiece by the greatest of the Sienese masters. This is Duccio di Buoninsegna. So they're decorating the church in the early 1300s after they've concluded the building. And there's a document that the Church of San Cherbone paid for this painting in 1316. So this is, again, an altarpiece, or what's left of an altarpiece by Duccio di Buoninsegna. We don't know a ton about Duccio, but he was the man. In the 1300s, he was the go-to painter of the Sienese government. So again, this kind of attests to the importance of Massa Marittima, the fact that they have commissioned an altarpiece from Duccio. So again, this painting is behind this velvet rope, and you can't really see it very well because it's enclosed in this kind of plexiglass case. And it's painted on the back, and I know that. And I wanted to see it, of course, but you're not really able to even get close to it. So I kind of pled with the custodian, who let me go around the back to see what's back there. And you can see that what's existing anyway are parts of scenes of the Passion of Christ. And there's a large panel of the crucifixion, which is here, which we're going to look at more closely in a minute. And then you can this kind of shows you too, you can see that the altarpiece has been very much changed since its original conception. It's lost all of its gold frames, these are the bare spots of wood. There would have been fancy gilding in here. It's also been cut down. If you look at the base there, the bottom of the panel that's resting on that wooden support, you can really see the jagged edge where it was just kind of sawed up into pieces. So the remaining portion of this scene, though, this is the arrest of Christ by the Roman soldiers. And you can see a group of helmets. And then you can see there's one person wearing a halo. The face, unfortunately, is missing, but you can see the halo here. So this was Christ who's being arrested by the Roman soldiers. So we're looking at scenes of the Passion of Christ, things that led up to the crucifixion. Even from this tiny little fragment of a work, you can really see Duccio's expert handling of the landscape with those kind of jagged rocks, which were representing the Holy Land. His attention to naturalistic details. Check out that guy on the left who's blowing the horn. And even his attention to the torches, those little kind of cages up on the, kind of on these spikes with the glow of the coals that are being held. And then a hallmark of Duccio is his conception of space and the idea that he kind of gives you an idea of action. So you've got this idea of a really chaotic scene on a panel that's about, it's about this big cut in half, right? But you still kind of get this idea of almost kind of a cinematic approach to what's going on here. So I'm going to tell y'all a little bit about Duccio. We're going to see a couple more of his works, and then we're going to come back to this work that's in Massa Marittima. So Duccio is born in Siena. We really don't know much about his early days, but he studied with a painter called Guido da Siena. And he trained in the bottega of Guido, who was working in this very typical for the time, kind of flat abstract style that's influenced by the tradition of Byzantine icon painting. This is very common for the period, and Duccio learned to paint like this, okay? And then he had a series of other influences, and he was a major artist, so he, of course, developed his own style, but this is kind of the style that he came from. So he learned to paint like this. He was then influenced by French Gothic art. This is an illuminated manuscript by the Master Honoré. This is from the 1280s. And these are, small little prayer books, and they were circulating. So artists in Italy saw this. Particularly important for Duccio is the kind of mannered, elegant, courtly style of these figures. And look at the fluttery drapery folds, just literally how the folds are treated down here. Very different to what was happening in Florence. This is an artist who was very well known to Duccio. This is Coppo di Marcovaldo, who's a Florentine. And he was definitely kind of steeped in the Byzantine conventions, things like the gold striations in the drapery, the jagged folds of the drapery. It looks more like broken glass than if you compare that to what we just saw in the French prayer book with all those frilly little folds. He is using some molding, though, to kind of create the faces. And that's kind of a hallmark of naturalism that kind of shows you what's coming in Florence. So he was definitely part of the Byzantine tradition, Coppo, but he was kind of forward-looking as well. So the Madonna that you see on the left was painted in 1260. It was actually a Sienese commission. It was installed in a church in Siena. So Duccio definitely saw that painting. And then if Duccio was in Florence, which he was, if he went into the baptistry, he would have seen the Christ, the universal judgment. And this is actually a mosaic in the baptistry in Florence. So Duccio would have seen for sure both of these works. This is another older Florentine master that Duccio was in touch with. This is Cimabue. These guys kind of influenced each other. This is the Santa Trinita Maestà, painted in about 1280. So the Maestà means the Madonna and Child enthroned in majesty. The word for majesty is Maestà. So we call these a Maestà. Again, done in 1280 for an important church in Florence. Here again, you can see those Byzantine aspects we talked about, including really those kind of conventional, almost abstract features of the Virgin's face, the angel's face, the Virgin's hands, for example. But if you look at the throne, he's going for some naturalism here too. He's really trying to create a space for the Madonna and Christ to be inside of, right? He's really trying to convey this idea of a throne that kind of embraces the Madonna and Child. So Duccio does a similar thing. This is the earliest work we know of by Duccio, but this is an enormous work of art. It's 15 feet tall. It was commissioned by the Rucellai family in Florence and installed in Santa Maria Novella. This is a very high-profile commission. So Duccio did something before this for sure, but this is the earliest painting that we know about. Check out the throne here. There's kind of an oblique view. It's tilted slightly to one side. Again, this is to give the idea of space, that it's receding into space. This is 100 years before Brunelleschi deduced how to effectively render one-point perspective and therefore kind of, have this idea of 3D on a 2D, on a flat panel. So these guys are really working on that and with some success, right? I mean, you get the idea that the Madonna and Child are actually sitting in this space. So look at the drapery of the Madonna. It does not have the gold striations. It has those fluttery little folds. See it down here, very much like what we saw with the French prayer book. The face of Christ is nicely shaded, right? There's some kind of hint of humanism there. And then Christ is wearing that, the kind of pink drapery with the gold striations. So Duccio is really not old-fashioned. He kind of gets that rap sometimes. And I was taught that in art history school, right? So I have a master's in art history, and I remember going to these art history classes, and Duccio was like the backwards looking, Byzantine guy. Actually, no, he has absorbed and knows exactly what's going on from all of his colleagues, and he makes choices. So he has some naturalistic details there in the Christ child, but he's kind of giving this idea of, kind of imbuing sacred quality into the painting by using these gold striations that do, in fact, come from the Byzantine tradition. So also, if you look at those angels, the angels that are holding the throne, the ones on the bottom are kneeling on the ground. And then as you go up, they're just kneeling on nothing. I'm very literal. I'm like, those angels are kneeling on air. It just makes no sense to me, right? Their foot's kind of braced back here on the frame, but they're not fluttering around. They're not floating like angels do. They're like kneeling on nothing. Duccio's not literal. He doesn't really care. There's angels holding up a throne. He's not really going for hyper-realism. He's really just trying to create a sacred image that then will inspire meditation and prayer. So again, Duccio knew exactly what everybody else was doing, and he was well aware of the advances in art, also in Florence, which led to, the Italian Renaissance. And he also helped lead up to the Italian Renaissance in his own way, while maintaining his kind of subjective approach and using bits and pieces from all of the traditions to which he had been exposed to. So let's take a look at his most famous work. This is much later in his career. So we just saw a work from the 1280s. This is now 1311, and 5 years later, he paints the Massa picture. So let's take a look at this. This is his Maestà for the high altar of the Cathedral of Siena. This is his most famous work. It was famous from the day it left his workshop. He was working in Siena. It took him 3 years to complete this painting. It's a series of paintings, really. And the day that it was installed in the church, they didn't just take it from the workshop to the church. They declared a feast day. All shops were closed. All businesses were closed. There was a huge procession. Everybody was out. First the priests with musicians, and then all the townspeople followed this painting as it was processed throughout town. It went around the Piazza del Campo and then into the church. It was placed on the high altar, and it remained there for over 200 years. This is one of the most important masterpieces in the history of Western painting, and it influenced generations of artists to come. So you're looking again at the Maestà with scenes of everything you can think of: life of Christ, life of the Virgin, Passion. It's also painted on the back, of course. It's enormous. This is sort of 15 by 16 feet. This is a reconstruction. The paintings, there's over 70 little panels here. They were separated in the 1700s and placed on different altars in the same church. They've been gathered back together, and they're almost all in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo in Siena. Some of them have been dispersed, and there's a couple panels in the United States, actually. You can see works by Duccio from the Maestà in the Metropolitan in New York and the National Gallery in Washington. Here's the central panel. So Duccio by now has gone, notice the throne is not oblique, it's straight, kind of full frontal. He's created this very elaborate inlaid marble throne. This was kind of the style for a large period of time right here in this period, 1300s up into the early 1400s as well. He's surrounded by angels, doctors of the church, prophets, evangelists. The Bishop of Siena is in there. Look how the angels are acting, though. They're no longer kneeling on air. They're literally up next to the throne and kind of draped over it. So very natural poses. But he's still kind of picking and choosing as far as naturalism and the Byzantine conventions go, because the Madonna, if you look at her face, her hands, as well as the angels, they're very much part of that Byzantine tradition. They're features in any event. And then he's used more naturalistic details. For example, this is sort of a portrait of a Sienese bishop. And even the Christ child's got his nice little chubby cheeks. He's looking very, a little bit more realistic, let's say. So Duccio was definitely picking and choosing. He's been described as transcendent yet human. So he's really using conventions from Byzantine art to add a spiritual dimension, and then also putting in bits of actual realism that, as the viewer, kind of bring you even closer into the life and suffering of Christ. Here's the kind of central back panel. I'm going to show you one panel, this one, the entry into Jerusalem, and then we're going to look at the crucifixion up next to the crucifixion that is in Massa. So here's the entry into Jerusalem, Christ and his disciples. So you can really see here his skill at conveying a narrative. He's also, again, this idea of motion and kind of almost, chaotic movement. Notice how the figures are cut off on the vertical edges. It really gives you this idea that this is a huge procession that is coming along. It's going to swing around that corner and go into town, and you're just getting a snippet of it. It's almost kind of cinematic, right? It looks like, you're really just getting a snippet of a much larger procession. He's got a great handling of space. Color, absolutely amazing. He uses color to kind of lead your eye around the picture, and he also just chooses colors that are, just luscious. Look at the kind of purple and green that he's juxtaposed right here, and the way he's kind of modeled all the draperies of the figures with the light and shade, using color to do that. And the naturalistic details, which we've seen a little bit of before. There's a guy up in the olive tree who's he's plucking olive branches and handing them out to all of the various participants. And then there's this guy here who's taken off his overcloak, and he's fluttering it down onto the path, so that Jesus's donkey can have a smoother entry into Jerusalem. So he's a really great storyteller and very good at creating these tiny compositions that really kind of pack a punch. So here we are with the Maestà from Siena on the left, 1311, and the Maestà from Massa on the right, 1316. So again, Massa is terribly ruined, but there's enough left that you kind of get an idea of the similarities here. So the Madonnas are both basically with these Byzantine features. Christ is a little bit more realistic. There's that sumptuous drape in the back. You can see some Cufic figures here too. I can't see well enough on the Siena piece, but that was quite common to use, basically Arabic script, which places the Madonna in the Holy Land where she was born. And then there's the throne, which again, Massa is so ruined, it's hard to see, but if you take a look here, you can actually see that there was indeed a very elaborate inlaid marble throne. And then let's go to the back. Here's the scenes of the crucifixion. Again, just master of composition. There's kind of chaos on the right with the clumps here on the right of the crucifixion, one over here ruined, and then this one, which are the Pharisees and some Roman soldiers who basically kind of are realizing the horror here. They understand what's happened. And then on the left, each group creates this lovely kind of arc in a circle that encompasses the Mary. St. John and Mary encompass the Virgin and the Magdalene as at the moment of Jesus's death. So they're quite similar. The only real difference is the arms of the thieves here are kind of bent back over the crossbar. Jesus's arms, unfortunately, are just missing. They were, in fact, attached to the crossbar. And then there's this new group at the bottom in this gorgeous landscape, this kind of rocky landscape that evokes the Holy Land. There's this new group that is the group of Romans who are dividing Jesus's garments among themselves and have decided to cast lots for the tunic, which was woven in one piece. They didn't want to tear it up. So they're casting lots to decide who gets the tunic. Again, absolute fragment, but the color here is so good. And just look at how he's used gray and pink here in this drape, and then the guy over there on the right with all shades of turquoise, just luscious. I also happened to get a decent photograph. It's not so easy to photograph these things or find photographs of these things, but here's a good example, even though it's not in great shape. So here's Duccio, front and back panels of what's left of the Maestà of Massa Marittima. So he really was the point of departure for generations of painters, and great painters came out of his workshop, such as the Lorenzetti brothers, Ambrogio and Pietro Lorenzetti. And all the guys who came out of Duccio's workshop were given commissions all throughout Italy. So they really kind of built on the legacy of Duccio and took this out into the world. So here you're looking at Pietro Lorenzetti. This is the Deposition of Christ from 1320 in St. Francis of Assisi. In the bottom church. The great sense of color, design, pattern, kind of those arches over, main kind of interlocking arches, basically, of this very moving composition. The naturalistic details are just great. Look at how he's got the Magdalene's hair. She's kind of pushed it behind her ear. The hand of the Madonna that's going through the hair of Christ, which is actually marked with blood, if you look really closely. Really adds pathos, palpable grief to this depiction of the deposition. And then another figure who came out of the workshop of Duccio is Simone Martini. This is 1333 Annunciation, which is at the Uffizi. Here we've got just this, gorgeous, graceful, elegant scene of the Virgin Mary, who, is just this courtly figure plucked out of the French prayer books. And then there's Gabriel coming to give her the news. And he is like the most solid angel that I've ever seen, right? He's got the fluttery drapery, which is kind of tartan, which is kind of funny. But he is solidly on the ground. So, he's picking and choosing as well. So very interesting. These guys came out of the studio of Duccio. And also, I just saw this yesterday. I was sitting here kind of doing some studying up on Duccio and his followers. And there is an exhibition that's going to open in October at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York titled Siena, The Rise of Painting from 1300 to 1350. So their press release says that the show examines this exceptional moment at the dawn of the Italian Renaissance and the pivotal role of Sienese artists in defining Western painting, including Duccio and his followers, Pietro and Ambrogio Lorenzetti and Simone Martini. So it's interesting that such important works of art like Duccio are on display in Massa. There's another kind of surprise in the Cathedral of Massa. I was all excited to see Duccio, and again, I knew it had been painted on the back, and I was very excited that we were allowed to go around the back and actually see it. As I said, I had to kind of beg a custodian to take down the velvet rope so we could get back there. But if you go behind the altar, there is this great arca or tomb of San Cerbone. It was originally literally underneath the altar, as you can see in this old photograph. Today, it's very nicely installed around the back of the altar, accessible. You don't have to ask the custodian to let you in. And my boyfriend, Domenico, who's a sculptor, saw this and his mouth just dropped open when he saw this thing. So we're looking at a tomb of San Cerbone with scenes from the life of San Cerbone. We've already seen some of those, but this one is sculpted really with astonishing skill. The scenes taken together really have kind of a musical quality. Somebody was really paying attention to how the compositions worked together. Very clear spaces are created for this story to unfold. But who is this? Like, we just have no, no knowledge of, of this work of art or who this could possibly be. Luckily, there's an inscription underneath one of the scenes of a miracle of San Cerbone, and the inscription here is dated to 1323, and it says that Peruchus, who is a church worker, has commissioned this work of art from Maestro Goro Gregori de Sienese, that is the master sculptor Goro di Gregorio from Siena. So we've never heard of this guy. He gets zero recognition in the art history books. He just kind of fell through the cracks. They only put in the big guys, I guess. This guy, though, was a master sculptor who worked from the late 1200s into the early 1300s. His father was in the workshop of Nicola Pisano in the Duomo of Siena. And Goro, along with his brothers, were scalpelline, which means stonecutters, basically, and collaborated with Giovanni in the Duomo in Siena. And then Goro goes to Pisa and opens his own bottega. So he's an extremely successful artist, trained by the very people who laid the groundwork for the Italian Renaissance. And here he is in Massa Marittima in the early 1300s. So 1323, this is a work by Goro di Gregorio. Here you're looking at another one of the miracles of San Cerbone. This is a miracle that happened as he was heading down to see the Pope before he picked up the flock of geese. You can see him and his entourage, all on horseback, have stopped, and one of the guys is holding the horse of Cerbone, who is dismounted, in order to heal three sick men who are kind of lying out over here in the landscape. So the scene is very clearly divided into parts. You can really tell what's going on, and there's this very interesting sculpting technique, which is really kind of approximative. The guy has been using kind of larger, actually, I think I have one. He's been using this kind of thing, a bulino, to just kind of hack out big facets of stone, and he's not really going back with any smaller instruments. This thing, you can see how this is not what he was using, but it's something kind of similar. But he wasn't using really fine instruments to, very particularly model anything. The trees here he spent a lot of time on the trees, but the faces even of the figures are pretty kind of approximate, but it really all works. So it's a very interesting style that he clearly kind of learned so much from Nicola Pisano and Giovanni Pisano, but then really developed his own style. Here's another scene, and I'm going to show you a close-up so you can kind of see how he treated the faces. So this is when the entourage with the geese get to Rome, and they are coming down a hillside. You can kind of see every bit of the horse here, right? From the rear end of the horse, they kind of swoop around, and here you see the front of the horse and the side of the horse. They've made it to Rome. They're going into the Vatican, and then they actually go in for the papal convocation. You can see this nice, tight little interior scene. Although there is that little relief of a door back here, kind of giving an idea of more space that opens up. So Cerbone has, here you see him with his bishop's mitre. He goes into the Vatican. He kneels down. He presents the geese to the Pope. His friend holds his hat for him because, of course, he removes his hat as a sign of respect. And the Pope, who usually will remain seated for an audience, he's on his feet. He has risen in respect for Cerbone. So a lot of mutual respect here. The Pope sees Cerbone and actually grants him sainthood right then and there. So here is a close-up. You can really see this guy's pointing the way, literally, go in there. So again, kind of approximative. sculpting, but really successful. And what's cool too here is to see the remains of some paint that was left. So these images were painted. The background behind the guys on horseback was kind of a dark green, as was the interior of the Pope's cloak. And you can see the frieze up here as well as kind of black and white. So these are all, I mean, these are big name artists, right, that we've just talked about. And there are other big name artists in Massa, in churches and the museum, including the Lorenzetti. There are also local artists at work here in Massa. We saw one over the door to the cathedral. And then there's a painting, kind of curious here, in what is called the Palazzo dell'Abbondanza, the Palace of Abundance. This was a granary from at least 1265 with public fountains inside of it. It was used from the 1200s until 1778. When it was remodeled, it was used as a theater. And then in the 90s, it was restored, and they actually had to uncover, but they uncovered this fresco that you see there on the left. And it's kind of curious. So this is an unknown local artist who has painted the tree of abundance, or the tree of fertility. And it's a fruit tree, which is producing these really strange fruits and an excessively phallic shape, as you can see. One woman is trying to knock the fruits off the tree, and these strange little birds are flying around. And then two women have picked up one of the fruits, and they're actually fighting over it and pulling each other's hair. So you kind of never know what you're going to find when you're out exploring in these little towns in Italy. Random town, middle of nowhere, and there's Duccio, Giovanni Pisano, the discovery of Gordo di Gregorio and the fruit tree, among others, because there are a lot of other nice works of art here. So meanwhile, it's all free. There's no reservation needed. And you have it to yourself. I mean, we were alone in the cathedral. It was just us, us and the custodian who let us go see the back of that painting. So keep that in mind, because there's really, there's no need to participate in over-tourism. And there's a lot of talk about that in the news recently. Y'all probably seen some things. If any of y'all travel, you've probably kind of bumped into some of that stuff online. But over-tourism really tends to denature places so that they're really no longer authentic, but there are plenty of authentic places out there, and you can see stuff like this. And I mean, it's great, and there's a lot to see. So I'm a proponent for getting off the beaten path. And so I encourage you to kind of go out and explore, and I'll take you there too. So if you want to come on any of our trips, we'll be going to some of these off the beaten path places. All right, so now we're going to make pappa al pomodoro. And this is literally the simplest of summer dishes, the perfect Tuscan recipe for peak tomato season. So I'm going to show y'all how to make pappa al pomodoro.
Elaine,
Sì.
puoi far vedere un'altra volta il bulino, quello per scolpire? Che
Sì.
eravamo in condivisione dello schermo.
Oh, sì. Questo. This is not what he was using. This is a more modern element, but it was something like this. So a sculptor kind of holds it like this, and then takes I have a knife, but they would just, tom, tom, tom. So that's what he was using. And that particular sculptor tended to use these rough tools, as opposed to these things get finer and finer and finer and finer until you end up with a shiny surface. He didn't bother with that. But again, he didn't need to, because he was so successful at representing what he wanted to represent using the kind of the rougher utensils. All right, so I'm going to make pappa al pomodoro. And again, it is basically one of the simplest dishes on the planet. And it's tomato season, so we're using tomatoes. And this is one of those Tuscan recipes that is something to do with old bread. I don't actually eat a ton of bread, so I don't really have old bread laying around like most of these people do. So I actually have to get the bread ahead of time and let it dry out. But I've done that. So this is what the bread looks like. You need a real nice hearty loaf of bread to do this with, and just let it sit out for a couple of days. This is from Tuesday, and it's now Saturday. So I'm going to get started with just some cloves of garlic. I'm just going to smash them. So smashed cloves of garlic. Sorry, I know that's loud. I do this very, very simply. There are people who do this with carrots, celery, etc. I just use hot peppers and garlic. This is my summertime version. So hot peppers and garlic get warmed in olive oil. I'm using olio della donna.
You made the original recipe because normally my granny use only garlic, don't use all the vegetables like carrots and onions.
No.
So, no, the original one is only with garlic.
So, and I was actually taught, this recipe was taught to me by an older Italian woman who would have been the generation of your grandmother. So this is the way they always used to do it, apparently. So I'm using my Tuscan olive oil, olio della donna, with the lovely Rita Pedula painting on it. So I'm going full on traditional with just some garlic and a little bit of hot pepper. But I do a version in winter as well. And hang on a second, I have a prop. So in winter, I'm using fresh tomatoes because that's what we have right now. But in winter, if you happen to make passata, and I'm going to send you the recipe tomorrow. So this is just tomato sauce. This is basically tomatoes that have been very barely cooked and run through a food mill. So there's no skin and hardly any seeds left. You can use this. And if you do this in the middle of winter, you can actually use a leek, and that is really good in here. And it's just a lovely little bit of summertime in the middle of winter. But in summer, you might as well use fresh tomatoes, but of course, that's what we have a lot of right now. So we're doing that. So I'm just going to let this warm up until the garlic kind of starts to go translucent. Lorenzo, se ci sono domande?
No, but I have you can make in winter because this recipe is very good warm, but is very good also cold, because in summer I prefer to eat cold with a little bit of olive oil, but in winter is like a tomato soup with it's very good.
Exactly. It's good hot, it's good tepid, it's good room temperature, and it's very good chilled, which in fact in summer it's been so hot that we would rather eat it not super hot. So I'm just letting the garlic and the hot pepper kind of warm up in the olive oil. And then I prepared the tomatoes, and I actually chopped them up and sprinkled some salt on there so that just for a couple hours, it's been drawing out some of the liquids, because you need some liquid to go with the bread, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add the tomatoes to the pot. Well, I've already salted the tomatoes. So they're going to cook just for another minute there, and all of that tomato juice that's coming out. So when they kind of rendered some of their liquid, I'm going to go ahead and add the bread. And I've just cut the bread up into chunks like this. I tend to take off the crust, but Domenico, who's going to eat this, he wants the crust on there. He tends to take out the tomato skins. He prefers the passata. The tomato skins really don't bother me at all. So we're having the skins and the crust, which actually is the easiest way to do this. So you just chop up the tomatoes into big pieces, chop up the bread into whatever size pieces, however it comes out. And then the bread is going to soak up all the tomato liquid, and I'm going to add a little bit of broth just to kind of bring it up to level. And at that point, it just cooks for sort of 45 minutes. And you just kind of mash it and stir it and mash it and stir it, and it turns into this very smooth mixture.
Which kind of broth?
I actually have meat broth, but you can use vegetable broth, chicken broth, meat broth, whatever you want to use is fine. So I'm going to start just like squishing up some of the tomatoes, just kind of mashing them a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and add the bread and I'll show you what it looks like.
I prefer to leave all the crust and the leaves.
Also the skin of the tomato.
Yeah, I prefer.
Because it's easier, that's why.
Oh, because my grandmother was poor, so they don't throw away anything.
Exactly. Keep you out there. Don't be throwing away the crust and don't be throwing away the tomato skin. Good point. So it's kind of half and half, maybe a little more tomatoes than bread. So the bread, obviously, the stale bread is a sponge. It's already starting to break down. I'm going to add one more piece, and now I'm going to add some liquid. Can y'all see? Y'all can kind of see what's going on in the pan. It's really, it just looks like, I'll see if I can show it to you more closely. So it just looks like bread and tomatoes, but there you can kind of see the bread is really soaking up all the tomato liquid. And so now I'm going to add broth, which is hot.
It's very important to not add a lot of broth in.
Say that again.
Yeah, you can add not all in the same times. So
right, I'm gonna add enough to exactly. I'm gonna add a little bit to just kind of make all the bread start breaking down. And then as it cooks, I'm gonna add a little more just to make sure I have a nice loose mixture. I just want to make sure all the bread is fully saturated with liquid.
it's more important for the texture at the end of the plate.
Exactly. And then I am kind of just mashing it. And so, the bread itself is kind of falling apart. And then it's going to take a few minutes for the crust to actually disintegrate in there. But it just kind of turns into, I'm going to just set it so that it just simmers nicely. And this is going to take probably 30, 45 minutes. And I'm not going to make y'all sit here for that. I've already got one made. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. Once it starts to really break down, I'm going to add a good amount of sweet basil. And then that's it. I'm going to serve it with a bunch of extra virgin olive oil and a couple more basil leaves, and that's it. But it is just like the essence of summer. It's so good. Really, it's definitely comfort food.
Elaine, Trish ask low or medium heat?
This is on medium. I'm turning it down to low. It just needs to simmer. You don't want all the liquid to boil out immediately. You want it to sort of slowly boil so the tomatoes break down, the pieces of bread break down, and it just really kind of turns into a cream. So simmer.
And you don't want that the bread burn, so it's better medium heat.
Also, yeah, you don't want too high of heat. If the the bread will stick and burn, and then you'll end up with kind of a dry mixture. You really want it to be creamy. And so by having it go kind of slowly and then add a little bit more broth as it goes on, everything has to just kind of break down. But it breaks down and makes literally kind of like a cream. I'm going to put some olive oil on top. And this is something you really kind of want a good dose of olive oil. And then a couple of leaves of basil. And then you have to eat this with a spoon. So here you go. This is like Tuscan summer comfort food. Mm.
And it's very important to don't use cheese over there.
No cheese. Unnecessary.
No cheese.
Totally unnecessary. Yeah, we do not need cheese. No, it's so flavorful. I mean, the tomatoes give so much, and then it's just so creamy and flavorful. And then the olive oil and the basil are perfect together. And with the tomatoes, it's really a complete thing. It's all you need. So there you go, pappa al pomodoro. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, but about the first part. And from Linda, she asked, what was the term you used for the figures at the bottom of the columns?
Oh, I called him a herm. Hang on a second. My phone needs to be off. They're herms. Herms are figures that hold kind of columnar figures that hold things up. Giovanni's are, most of the time you see them as whole figures. Even in the ancient world, you see them and they're sort of standing like this a lot of times, holding up a cornice. Giovanni's are often, they're contorted and on the ground and they're holding up a column on their head or something. Very typical of Giovanni Pisano, though.
Oh.
And then
Let's go back to that. Track physicals.
Any more?
They're endure physicals. So Malcolm, big scar on his elbow.
Oh, well, yeah, well, you know.
Yes, Linda. Herm, H-E-R-M. There may be another word for that, but that's the one that's in my head. Herm. So,
Right.
Yeah.
all right, we don't have any more questions. I'm going to say goodbye. Anybody else with questions?
It's been there about a week now, right? With the orientation and everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got some reverb coming in. I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye. Thank y'all so much for
now last night to a very nice
tomorrow.
restaurant.
You're going to
Mini
get the
bucks,
recipes
but
for
really good. It's called Serenade. It's a really nice restaurant. So we had a good time.